Have you ever wondered whether the person who seems the most detached, the one who acts like they don't need anyone, might actually be the one staring at the ceiling every night, replaying every moment they shared with you? When someone pulls away the moment emotions become real, it's easy to assume the feelings were never genuine. Most people interpret distance as disinterest and silence as rejection. But human psychology is rarely that simple. In many cases, especially with someone who has strong avoidant attachment patterns, the very behaviors that look like indifference can be driven by the overwhelming intensity of genuine emotional connection. The closer they begin to feel, the stronger their instinct becomes to create distance. That contradiction confuses the people who love them and often confuses the avoidant person just as much. What if the person who runs the fastest when things get close is also the person who can't stop thinking about you once the lights go out? What if the silence that feels so cold on the outside is filled with conversations they never have the courage to speak aloud? What if the distance you've been interpreting as proof they don't care is, in some cases, the very way their nervous system tries to protect itself from emotions it doesn't know how to manage? Stick around, because what I'm about to walk you through is going to reshape everything you thought you understood about avoidant behavior. And if you've ever fallen for someone who bolted the moment things got real, this is going to land somewhere deep. Because here's the truth that almost nobody talks about. Avoidant attachment isn't simply about fearing commitment. It isn't about enjoying loneliness or wanting to hurt people. At its core, it's often about a nervous system that learned long ago that emotional dependence could lead to pain, disappointment, or the loss of control. Instead of moving toward closeness when love grows, their instincts often tell them to step back, slow everything down, or disappear altogether. To someone on the receiving end, that behavior feels deeply personal. You begin asking yourself painful questions. Was I too much? Did I scare them away? Did they ever love me at all? But the answer is often more complicated than any of those questions. Sometimes the very relationship they value most is the one that activates the strongest fears inside them. That's why you may notice something that seems completely contradictory. During the day, they appear busy, distracted, even emotionally detached. But when the noise fades, when there are no conversations to hide behind, no work to distract them, no endless scrolling to numb their thoughts, something changes. The quiet creates space for emotions they spend the entire day avoiding. Memories begin replaying. Conversations echo in their mind. They wonder how you're doing. They revisit moments they never fully processed. They imagine reaching out, then immediately talk themselves out of it. This doesn't automatically mean every avoidant secretly wants to reunite with every former partner. Real life is far more nuanced than that. Some relationships end because they truly should end. Some people move on in healthy ways. But when an avoidant has developed genuine emotional attachment, those feelings often don't disappear simply because they created physical distance. In many cases, they carry those emotions privately for much longer than anyone realizes. The irony is that the stronger the connection becomes, the harder it can be for them to tolerate the vulnerability that comes with it. Love asks people to trust. It asks them to rely on someone else. It asks them to accept uncertainty. For someone whose early experiences taught them that closeness wasn't always emotionally safe, those normal parts of intimacy can trigger alarm instead of comfort. That's why their actions can seem so confusing. They may miss you while avoiding you. They may think about calling while convincing themselves not to. They may crave closeness while simultaneously creating more distance. From the outside, it looks inconsistent. From the inside, it often feels like an exhausting battle between longing and self-protection. Understanding this doesn't mean excusing unhealthy behavior or waiting endlessly for someone who refuses to grow. Emotional struggles explain behavior, but they don't erase personal responsibility. Healthy relationships still require communication, accountability, and a willingness to work through fears instead of letting them control every decision. But if you've spent months wondering how someone could seem so distant while somehow remaining emotionally present in subtle ways, you're about to understand the hidden psychological mechanisms behind those contradictions. By the end, you'll see why avoidant behavior isn't always the absence of love. Sometimes it's the presence of fear standing directly in love's way. And once you recognize that difference, many of the confusing pieces begin to fit together in an entirely new light. Before we dive in, drop a quick word below to let me know you're here. And if you haven't hit subscribe yet, I'd genuinely appreciate it. We're building this community from the ground up, working our way toward our first 1,000 subscribers. And honestly, we're not there yet. Every single person who joins makes a real difference, more than you'd think. Okay, let's get into it. Let's really unpack what's going on inside an avoidant person when they actually miss you. Not the shallow, performative version of missing someone. I mean the real thing, the kind they'd never confess out loud, not even to themselves. I'm talking about those raw, private hours when the noise of the day fades out and there's nothing left to hide behind. Because here's something almost nobody explains properly about avoidant people. They are not numb. They feel things intensely, sometimes more intensely than the people around them realize. The gap between them and everyone else isn't a lack of feeling. It's that somewhere along the way, they built an entire internal framework convincing them that emotion equals danger, that needing another person is a form of weakness, and that longing for someone leaves them exposed in a way that could eventually break them. And they've believed that story for so long, it stopped feeling like a belief and started feeling like fact. So when they genuinely miss you, when the ache is real, they don't pick up the phone, they don't send a text, they don't reach out in any of the obvious ways. Instead, something entirely different happens inside them, and that's exactly what we're going to explore. Let's back up and understand where this all comes from, because it helps to see the full picture of what's happening in this person's inner world. The avoidant person in your life, whether that's someone you used to date, a partner who keeps retreating, or someone who blows hot and cold, didn't wake up one day and choose to be closed off. This wasn't a character flaw. Somewhere early in their life, probably earlier than most people realize, love came attached to a price. Maybe the adults who were supposed to love them unconditionally were unpredictable, warm one moment and distant the next, present sometimes and absent other times. Or maybe every time they expressed a need, they were met with indifference. They cried and were ignored. They asked for comfort and were told to toughen up. They let themselves be vulnerable and watch someone they loved step back instead of stepping closer. Naturally, their nervous system adapted because that's what nervous systems are built to do. It learned a lesson early. Needing people leads to pain, so the safest move is to stop needing them altogether. Become the person who requires nothing from anyone. Become fiercely self-reliant. Become someone who always appears fine, no matter what's happening underneath. And they got remarkably good at that performance, so good that eventually they started believing it themselves. They moved through their days looking composed, independent, in control. But then someone gets close. Someone starts to actually matter, and that's when something inside them lights up like a warning sign. It whispers that this is dangerous, that letting this person all the way in means risking total devastation if they ever leave. So the instinct kicks in. Create distance before they can be the one left behind. And that's exactly what they do. They retreat. They go quiet. They put up walls. Suddenly they're too busy, too irritated, convinced the relationship is moving too fast, or certain they just need some space. Meanwhile, you're left standing on the other side of that wall, wondering what you did to cause it. The truth is, you didn't do anything. That wall existed long before you ever showed up in their life. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn, something almost nobody talks about. What actually happens inside them after they've pushed you away, after you've walked out the door, or after another night has passed where they've acted like you're not even on their mind. The sun sets, the distractions dry up, the phone stops buzzing, the workday ends, the shows they were watching finish, and suddenly they're alone with nothing but their own thoughts. That's the moment it all begins. At first, it doesn't even register as missing you. It shows up as a kind of restlessness. They can't sit still. They wander from room to room. They pick up their phone, then set it back down without doing anything. They open the fridge and close it again, taking nothing. There's a low, nagging discomfort they can't quite put a name to, and they refuse to name it because naming it would mean admitting something they're not ready to face. So they try to escape it. They scroll endlessly. They put something on just for noise. They search for anything that might numb the feeling, and for a little while it might actually work. But then, without warning, a song plays that reminds them of you. Or a meme pops up that they know you'd find hilarious, or they read something and their first instinct is to send it your way. And for one brief second, before the defenses snap back into place, they feel it, that pull toward you, and that pull scares them more than almost anything else, because for someone avoidant, longing isn't just a passing emotion, it's proof of vulnerability, and vulnerability, in their mind, is the doorway to pain. So the moment that pull surfaces, they immediately reach for something to replace it. They redirect their attention toward anything that will drown it out. They'll message someone else, not because that person actually means anything, but because any kind of contact quiets the ache, if only temporarily. They'll text a friend just to have something to focus on. They'll respond to someone who's been sitting in their inbox. They'll open a dating app, not necessarily to actually meet anyone, but because the act of browsing gives them a sense of control that longing never offers. This isn't them moving on from you. This is them managing an emotion they don't know how to sit with. This is the same pattern they've followed their whole life, choosing the illusion of control over the discomfort of actually feeling something real. But here's the part that so often gets overlooked. Even while they're distracting themselves, deflecting, managing, some quiet corner of their mind is still thinking about you. It's not the loud, dominant part of their thoughts. It's the quieter voice they rarely allow to speak. And late at night, that quieter part does something very specific. It replays. Avoidant people, when they're missing someone, don't imagine a future with that person. Thinking about the future would mean allowing hope in, and hope carries risk. So instead, they retreat into the past because the past already happened. It can't hurt them the same way again. So they go back there, again and again. They replay the good moments, not the dramatic, obvious ones, but the small, quiet instances that slipped past their defenses when they weren't paying attention. The way you laughed at something completely unexpected. That one evening you sat together in comfortable silence and it felt like something they'd never allowed themselves to have before. The conversation that went further than they meant to let it. The moment you looked at them in a way that made them feel truly, fully seen. These small moments live somewhere inside them, tucked away. And late at night, when their guard has softened just slightly, they return to those memories. They still don't reach out, but they go there in their minds. Here's something avoidant people rarely admit out loud. They want closeness without exposure. They want to feel near you from a distance that feels safe enough that it won't cost them anything. They want the warmth of your presence without ever having to take the risk of truly reaching for you. So they orbit, they hover nearby without landing. They watch from a safe distance and tell themselves it's nothing, that they're just curious, that they're perfectly fine. Then the phone goes back on the nightstand. They lie down in the dark, and suddenly the silence feels loud. This is the turning point. This is when everything they've been suppressing all day begins to rise to the surface, and they lie there feeling this tangled mix of longing, fear, anger, and grief all at once. And that anger is worth paying attention to because it's usually not directed at you. It's directed inward at themselves. On some level, they know exactly what they did. They know they pulled away from something real. They know the distance they created wasn't wisdom. It was self-protection dressed up as strategy. And somewhere in that darkness, a version of them resents the part of themselves that struggles to let people in. But resentment doesn't undo years of conditioning overnight. So they stay there, tangled in that emotional storm, and they don't reach out because reaching out feels like admitting defeat. They don't know how to be in a relationship without keeping some part of themselves locked away, guarded. So they stay in that storm completely alone, which, when you really think about it, is the most avoidant thing they could possibly do. Choosing to suffer in isolation rather than risk real connection. Choosing familiar pain over unfamiliar possibility. That's the loop they've been living inside long before you ever entered their story. Now I want to speak directly to you for a moment, because if you're watching this, chances are there's someone specific in your life who fits this description, and you've probably spent a lot of energy trying to figure out how to reach them, what to say, how to make them feel safe enough to finally let you in. I completely understand that instinct. When we love someone, we want to be the exception. We want to be the one who finally breaks through the wall everyone else gave up on. We want proof that love is powerful enough to fix anything. But I need to say something honest here, because right now you deserve truth more than you deserve comfort. You cannot love someone out of their avoidance. There's no level of consistency, patience, or understanding on your part that will single-handedly heal their attachment wounds. That's simply not how healing works. Their avoidance isn't a challenge you overcome by trying harder. It's a deeply rooted pattern living inside their nervous system, and the only way it changes is if they choose to look at it themselves and actually do the work required to shift it. What you can control is your own understanding so that you stop taking their behavior personally. And here's the most important thing I want you to walk away with today. Their avoidance says nothing about your value. It's a reflection of their wound, not your worth. When they retreat, it doesn't mean you weren't enough. When they go cold, it doesn't erase what was real between you. When they can't bring themselves to reach out, even while lying awake missing you, it doesn't mean they don't care. It means they're stuck, trapped in a pattern that was originally built to protect them and has now become the very thing isolating them in the loneliest possible way. They're living inside a prison they built themselves, one they've convinced themselves is actually safety. And here's the cruel irony in all of this. The people who need connection the most are often the least equipped to ask for it. Avoidant people aren't cold-hearted by nature. They became cold as a way to survive something painful, and that survival mechanism keeps running long after the original threat has disappeared. Now let's talk about something practical, because understanding all of this is valuable. But what do you actually do with it? If you're currently in a relationship with someone avoidant and you're trying to make sense of their behavior, the first thing to understand is that pressure almost never works on an avoidant person. The harder you pursue, the further they retreat. This isn't a reflection of how much they care. It's because pursuit activates their internal alarm system. When someone approaches too fast or too intensely, their nervous system interprets it as a threat, even when there's no actual danger, even when you're doing everything right, even when you're the safest, most loving, most patient person imaginable. The very act of moving toward them can trigger their instinct to retreat. This doesn't mean you should start playing games or manufacturing distance to try to manipulate them into chasing you. What it actually means is that you need to build a life that doesn't revolve entirely around this relationship. You need interests, friendships, and goals of your own, a sense of identity that exists independently of whether they're being warm or distant on any given day. This isn't a manipulation tactic. It's genuinely about self-preservation. Because without that independent foundation, you'll slowly lose pieces of yourself trying to manage someone else's emotional world. And that isn't love. That's disappearing into someone else's pain. The second thing worth understanding is that avoidant people respond far better to steady consistency over time than to dramatic gestures or emotionally intense conversations. They don't trust big emotional moments because in their history, those moments were usually followed by disappointment or loss. What actually builds trust with someone avoidant is quiet, dependable presence, being someone who follows through on what they say. being someone who doesn't flip unpredictably, being someone whose warmth doesn't rise and fall based entirely on how the avoidant person is behaving that day. That kind of steadiness is genuinely magnetic to them, even if they never openly acknowledge it. Even if it seems like it's not registering at all, it is registering. It's just landing somewhere inside them that hasn't fully opened yet. The third thing has to do with how you express your own emotions. Avoidant people often shut down when faced with intense emotional pressure because their nervous system isn't equipped to process that level of input. So if your conversations tend to escalate quickly, filled with tears or frustration, that intensity often pushes them further away instead of pulling them closer. This doesn't mean suppressing what you feel. It means finding a calmer, steadier way to express it, one that feels safer for both of you. You can be entirely honest without overwhelming them. You can say, "I miss you," instead of, "I need you to fix this right now." You can say, "That hurt me," instead of, "You always do this, and I don't know how much more I can take." The message stays the same. It's the delivery that changes everything. Now, if you're on the other side of this dynamic, meaning you're the one who stepped back or walked away from someone avoidant, and you're wondering what might be happening in them right now, let's talk about that too. Here's what is likely unfolding inside them. The moment you gave them genuine space, not a manipulative tactic disguised as space, but real distance where your absence became undeniable, something inside them shifted. Because here's the part about avoidance that seems backwards until you understand the deeper attachment pattern at play. Avoidant people frequently don't recognize the true depth of their feelings until the relationship feels genuinely at risk of ending. While you were present, available, and actively pursuing them, their systems stayed in protective mode. The wall felt manageable, the distance felt controlled. But the second you actually pulled back, the moment you stopped being the one who always initiated contact, their internal system recalibrated, and what surfaced instead was the undeniable absence of something that actually mattered to them. That's when the late night replaying intensifies. That's when checking your profile becomes more frequent. That's when the restlessness grows louder, because the exact feeling they've spent their whole life avoiding is now impossible to escape. And even then, they still might not reach out. That's the harsh reality. Even when the feeling becomes undeniable, fear can still speak louder. The pattern runs deep. The thought of being vulnerable enough to say, "I was wrong," or "I miss you," or "I made a mistake," feels overwhelming to them, so massive that they'd rather sit in the discomfort of silence than risk the exposure that comes with honesty. But some of them do eventually reach out. Some reach a point where the longing finally outweighs the fear. And when that happens, it's rarely some grand declaration. It's usually something small, a meme, a random memory, a casual message like, "I was thinking about this thing," something with an easy exit built in, something they can retreat from if it doesn't land well. But don't mistake that small gesture for insignificance. For an avoidant person, that small reach out is enormous. It means they sat with their fear and chose to act anyway. It means something managed to break through the wall. And what you do in that moment matters more than almost anything else in this dynamic, because if you respond with overwhelming relief, if you immediately jump back into the same emotional intensity that existed before, there's a strong chance they'll retreat all over again. That window is delicate, and it demands a gentleness that honors how difficult it was for them to open it in the first place. You can be warm without appearing desperate. You can be genuinely glad without placing the weight of your emotions onto them. You can open the door a little wider without rushing through it all at once. This is a real skill, one that takes patience, self-awareness, and a great deal of internal work to respond to an avoidant person's effort without punishing them for the time they spent gone, and without rewarding them so intensely that the space collapses too quickly. Now let's pull back and look at the bigger picture, because we've spent a lot of time inside the avoidant person's internal experience, and that matters because understanding someone is always the first step toward relating to them with wisdom. But that understanding should never come at the expense of your own clarity about what you actually need. So ask yourself honestly, not the softened version shaped by hope or how deeply you love this person, but the real unfiltered question: is this relationship meeting enough of your needs to justify what it's costing you? Not perfectly, because no relationship is perfect, but enough. Are you receiving enough warmth, enough presence, enough reciprocity, enough emotional access to make staying worthwhile? Or are you slowly running on empty while fully understanding why they can't give you more? Understanding avoidance doesn't mean you're obligated to endure it indefinitely. You can hold complete compassion for someone's wounds and still recognize that the relationship shaped by that wound isn't something you can build a life around. Those two truths can coexist. You can love someone and still let them go. You can understand someone deeply and still choose yourself. That isn't giving up. That's wisdom. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for an avoidant person is to be honest enough to tell them the truth. I see you. I understand why you behave this way. And I also need more than what you're currently able to give. Not as a threat, not as manipulation, but as a simple, self-respecting statement of where you stand. Some avoidant people, when met with that kind of clear, grounded honesty, experience a genuine shift, because in their experience, people usually either tolerate the distance indefinitely or explode over it. They rarely encounter someone who can hold both truths at once, someone who can say, I care about you deeply, and I also know exactly what I need. That combination is rare, and for someone who's spent their entire life bracing for disappointment, encountering that kind of steady, compassionate clarity can be genuinely disarming. It doesn't guarantee a different outcome, but it's about as close to a real opening as it gets. So let's bring this full circle, back to where we began. The avoidant person in your life, lying awake at night, replaying old moments with you, checking your profile without saying a word, feeling that pull towards you, pushing it back down, feeling guilty for pushing it down, lost in a storm of things they can't bring themselves to say. They feel more than they let on. They miss you more than they'll ever admit. They want more than they know how to ask for, and on some level, they're afraid of all of it. That's the truth, and it's both heartbreaking and clarifying at once, because understanding this means you no longer have to wonder if you imagined the connection. You didn't. It was real. Their feelings were real. But real feelings and a healthy relationship pattern are two completely different things, and only one of them is enough to build something lasting on. What you choose to do with this understanding is entirely up to you. But now that you have it, everything looks a little different. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And let me know in the comments. We're building something meaningful here, one person at a time, and every single one of you is part of that. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to have you with us. We're working toward that first 1,000, and we're getting there one video at a time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening.